Hello, I have a promise to make to you. By the end of this video, I am hopeful that you and I together will understand what the hell this promises thing is in JavaScript. Because I'm a person who programs in JavaScript with callbacks. But there has been for quite a while something called a promise in JavaScript. And it used to be something that was part of certain libraries that you could import and add to your code. Now, as of I think ES6, which is ES 2015, whatever, as of a more recent version of JavaScript, promises are something native to how JavaScript works. So I hope this video will answer the question for myself as well as you. Why should you care about this? What is a promise and how do you make use of a promise? So the demonstration, so I have a JavaScript program already running. I think a good way to demonstrate this is to look at making requests for data from APIs. So I am making a request for a random word from the WordNick API, and then I am asking the Giphy API for a GIF associated with that word. So if I refresh this page, there we go. I refresh this page again, there we go. So this is the demonstration I'm going to use. Now, at present, the code for this is using the P5.js library with callbacks. There are no promises involved. There's a load JSON function that passes in the URL to a particular API. It has a callback for when the data is ready. Then I get that data, and then I go ask load JSON again with another URL, and then I have another callback. Oh my goodness. So here's the thing. A callback really makes sense for this idea of an event, right? When the mouse is pressed, trigger this function, it's an event. But if I want to sequence asynchronous things that happen in my program, meaning I'm making all these API requests, I'm asking for this, and then when this comes back, I want to do this. Callbacks can get very unwieldy, and you can actually find yourself living in what's known as, sound effect please, callback hell. So I'm going to show you right now callback hell. Now I've written this in a weird sort of way where I call load JSON. Okay, that's just way too distracting. Where I call load JSON and then, but you might imagine that you use anonymous functions. So when I call load JSON, instead of having this separate data function, I'm going to take this up here, and I'm going to put this in here. Why is this so? And then I'm going to, I don't need it to be a name. I'm just going to pass the callback in here directly. Okay? So this is perfectly normal to do. But then when I then go to the Giphy API, then I need this next anonymous function, and I need that to go in here. I don't want to name it anymore. It's an anonymous function, and there we go. So now let's refresh this. Hey, it still works. Homeward bound. Oh, there is no, what's great about this is going to trigger an error sometimes when it can't find an image, and I'm going to need that with promises. I'm going to need to figure out of handling errors. So look at this. This isn't even that bad. This is, but look how, this is just not sustainable. First of all, I don't like how much room I have here. This is like absolutely not sustainable. I want to load JSON, have this callback, then load this and have this callback. I could just keep going with this. And all of a sudden you can see my code, it just gets indented and indented and indented more. This isn't good. Could there be something better? I don't know. I don't know really if it's better or not, but there is something. And that something is called a promise. A promise is an object. So the idea of, so let's say, so we have this load JSON function, which expects a URL and then a callback. Here's another reason why we could get stuck in callback hell. We might need multiple callbacks for different things, like an error callback. And then our code is even more unwieldy, because then we have these sequences and we have different things for the success callback. So this is what our code looks like with a callback. Now, P5 at present doesn't support promises, but if it did, instead, I could say something like this: let promise equal load JSON URL. So the idea is, instead of passing a function a callback, you ask a function for a promise. So because the P5.js library doesn't support promises, and I am here to teach or learn, which one I'm not sure yet, about promises, I'm going to instead use a function called fetch, which is a function native to JavaScript in the browser that supports promises. So this gives me a promise. Once I have that promise, I have it as an object, and I can do all sorts of things with it. But the idea of a promise, it's an object that can be in a certain state. So the possible states are, it can be pending, right? This is while I'm waiting to get the data back from the API. It can be fulfilled, which means it's been successfully resolved. I have the results back from the API. Or it can be rejected, meaning some error has happened. So if I have this object, the idea is that I can just check this object to say, wait, hey object, hey promise, sorry. Okay, everything's fine. I just dropped the top of the marker. I have this promise. I have this promise. Hey, promise, you promised me something. Are you still pending? I'm waiting for you to finish your promise. Are you pending? And then I can say like, hey, were you rejected? Were you fulfilled? And then give me the stuff back. But here's the thing. If I do this, I actually don't need to query the promise continuously. I can use something called then and or catch. Then is a function that receives a function to be executed, it's kind of like a callback, when it has been fulfilled. And catch receives a function to be executed when it has been, if and when it has been rejected. And there's actually, if we go to the Mozilla JavaScript documentation page, there's a nice diagram. So this idea of a promise, it's pending, and you can see all this stuff that happens, but in the end, there's just a then or a catch. So this is the basic idea. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to rewrite that code using promises. Now, I should be explicit about a couple things. Number one is I am not creating, I can write code that creates promises. I can use them, and I'm going to get to that, but I'm not doing that right now. What I am doing is using somebody else's function that returns a promise. So I need to get to creating your own promises, and I'm going to make lots of promises. I'm hopefully going to keep them all. And then the other thing is I need to see, does this really help us? Does this really make our code easier to follow? And so let's just sort of see. So let's go back. So first of all, let me just show you where this function called fetch is coming from. So this is the fetch function. And basically, fetch is just a function that you give it a URL, and it fetches the stuff from that URL and gives you a promise back. So I am going to comment this out, and I'm going to say, let promise equals fetch word nick API. And then I'm going to say console log promise. So let's take a look and see what this is. Look at that. And at the moment, that promise is pending. Look, the promise is pending. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to do something very silly, which is, actually, let me do this in, let's do another one here. Let p equal, let's do this again just in the console. And let's look at that. Oh, hey, it's resolved. Like a few moments later, it's resolved, right? So at the next line of code, so I could do something crazy like while promise is not resolved, wait, but that would be like blocking code. The point of a promise is to handle asynchronous things. My program is going to keep going, but behind the scenes, it's going to be waiting for that data. And the way I do that, I'm taking way too much time to get to this, is with the then function. So watch this. If I say promise then, and then I put got data in here, And this is, nobody would ever write JavaScript like this. I'm just doing this in kind of a crazy way, and then I will condense it down. And then I write my getData function. Let's run this. And so take a look at this. Looks a little weird. Let's run this now. So I got, oh yeah, I forgot. Oh, this is great. I forgot the fetch function has some weird properties, which is going to cause us a bit of a problem, which is why we need promises. So look at this. So you can see I got the results back. But actually, the results have to be converted into a format that I can use. So, all right. So first of all, so this is the idea, right? And if there was an error, I could say promise catch got error. And I could say console log error. All right? So now let's make it have an error. Let's like mess up the URL by accident. And we can see I got an error there. Type error failed to fetch. So you can see this is the idea. I get a promise. I can give it a function with then for when it's successful, and I can give it a function for when there's an error. I forgot to mention that I'm going to start probably using the JavaScript arrow syntax in the course of looking at promises, because it's really helpful and in many ways necessary for working with them effectively. So if you haven't already watched my video or somebody else's video or tutorial about the JavaScript arrow notation, which is this notation, I would suggest you pause and go ahead and watch that and come back. Okay, so how would somebody really write this code? Well, most likely, you don't need to create this variable called a promise and then say .then. Really, most likely what you're going to see is just saying fetch, and this is called chaining. Almost everything in JavaScript is chain, meaning I'm going to do this function and chain it with the next thing. I can say .then got data, .catch got error. So this is more likely how you're going to see it written. And let's just see, do we still get that? We still get that error. And then if I fix it, now we can see we've got that response back correctly. Okay, now, how would I really see this? Most likely, I would see this with the use of anonymous functions. So this whole thing would end up in here without a name. And then this whole thing would end up in here also without a name. This is starting to maybe look a little better, and you might even see people do this. So because here's the thing, there's going to be a lot of sequencing. And what promises are going to allow me to do is really nicely say .then. So I can create this sequence of callbacks more easily. Now here's the thing. If I want to clean this up even a little bit more, I might want to use the arrow syntax. And once I use the arrow syntax, if I just have one line of code, I can simplify this. Let me make sure I have this right. And then I can do this. Did I stop talking? I had to concentrate. And this doesn't need a semicolon. Whoa, I made this confusing. But let's just do my best here. All right. So let's just make sure this still works. And then let's look at it again. Okay, it's still working. So look at this. This is starting to look kind of nice. It's confusing. This is not for your first day of programming, but I now have fetch, which returns a promise. And I can also, because I only have this one, I can do this. I can get rid of these parentheses. I have this function which returns a promise, and the promise is handled when it is fulfilled. The data is console logged. When there is an error, the error is console logged. That's what I have so far right now. And here's the thing. I want to actually get that word. Like I want to say data.word. But that's undefined. So this is the funny thing about fetch. If I go to the documentation for fetch and go under using fetch, yes, here's the thing. And you can start to see that there's something like what I'm showing you here. But there's also this like .json. So the thing is, the thing that's coming back from fetch, I have to ask for it to be converted into an object that I can use, and that's with the .json function. So let's look at how I would do this. So here's the thing. The .json function also, it returns a promise. So what I really want to do is this. I want to say when the data comes back, call .json, and then guess what? So this is really the response. Convert that to JSON, and then take the JSON and console log that, which is like this. All right, let's take a look at this. So now you can see how my sequencing is much easier to manage. I don't have callback hell. I actually just have the things that have to happen one line after the other. Boy, this is tough stuff. Whoops. There we go. And now you can see I have that word. And now, okay, so let's get a little bit better here, because what I really needed to do was call my createP function to make that paragraph. So I'm going to do this. So let's take a look at this. Let's just put that in there now. And there we go. Every time so now I'm using promises. I'm using fetch and promises. Okay. Now, I want to next go and try to request a GIF associated with that word. How am I going to do that? Now, first of all, I need to now, this is the thing, remember with the JavaScript arrow syntax, what this really is right here, this whole thing right here, if I were to rewrite this, it's this, function, JSON, createP, right? This is just this shorthand. But if I want to now ask to fetch the, what am I fetching? The Giphy API. If I want to do if I want to create the paragraph and then fetch the Giphy API, I no longer can be as shorthandy. I need to put the brackets back because I have 2 lines of code. I need to put those brackets back, and that means that parentheses needs to go here. This doesn't look right to me, and it's because I have an extra parentheses here where there should be a semicolon. There we go. So I have to put the curly brackets back in, then I can have 2 lines of code here, right? So now, first I want to fetch the WordNick API, then I want to take the response and convert it into JSON. Once I have a JSON, I want to create the paragraph and then fetch from the Giphy API. So what do I want to do now? Then, the same thing. Then take that response and convert it into JSON. Then the JSON, I'm going to do this. I need to just, whoops. Then with that JSON, all I need to do is create the image. So I can get that code I had before. This is creating an image object. And I'm not going through how the Giphy API works, but in the Giphy API, I get the JSON data index. I get the first GIF that's fixed height small and its URL. So look at this. Now, again, this is not so super, this is very concise and it's difficult to understand, but you can see how nice the sequencing is. I know I have some errors here, but let's at least see how far we get. Let's see how far we get. All right, so good news. I got the word sketch.js 18, JSON of undefined. 18, wait, why did that say 18? Let me run this again. Sketch 14, sorry. All right, so here's the thing. Promises are chainable, right? What are the things that return a promise? Fetch returns a promise, which is here. .json also returns a promise. So how come if this returns a promise, this worked, But this returns a promise. This one didn't work. Well, here's the thing. You have to explicitly in this chain of promises say return to continue to chain all of the thens. So I actually missed saying return here. So if I have to return the promise in order to have the next then sequence properly, how come I didn't have to return the response.json promise up here? Well, it's just because I'm making use of the arrow syntax shorthand. So I think I want to just remove most of the shorthand here and add back in the curly brackets and say return. So, and then, what am I need a parentheses here. And then also, now this is more long-winded than it needs to be, but I'm going to add back in the curly brackets, but I just want to emphasize, and I've already made another mistake. There we go. So now, let's see, can I fit this all in one page here? So now look at this. Now, if I showed you this at the beginning of this video, you would look at me like, oh my God, you're crazy. That makes no sense to me. But I'm hoping maybe this is somewhat comfortable for you. Maybe you have to go back and watch this video again. Maybe you never want to watch another video on my channel ever. But I'm starting with fetch and getting a promise. Then I get a response back and I'm returning the next promise about converting it to JSON. Then I am returning then I'm getting the JSON, adding the paragraph, and asking to fetch more data. Once that promise gets resolved, I take that result, return it to the JSON. Once that's ready, I take that JSON and make an image, and then I'm done. Now here's something that I didn't mention that's so magical about all of this. Each one of these things, an error could happen along the way. It could break because either one of these URLs could be wrong. The data that comes back couldn't be formatted right in such a way that I could get it back to JSON. This catch will catch any error anywhere throughout here. So if any error happens anywhere, it jumps down to here. This is much nicer than having to have separate error callbacks for every single thing that I might be doing in a sequence like this. So let me now, let's hope this works. This is time for me to use a drum roll. Let's see if this works. Oh boy. This has been a long video, I think. There we go. It's still working. No, that's the wrong one. No. There we go. I'm really sound effect challenged. So there we go. So I'm just going to now that we see this full sequence here, I'm going to go back and remove. I kind of like using once I'm already using the arrow syntax, I like to have that shorthand when possible because it does make it easier for me to follow the code. So I think I'm going to keep the curly brackets here because this is kind of a long thing to do. So now we can see there might be some other simplifications that I can write to this, and there's a lot of extra steps just because of the way that fetch works, but this really shows like if I had to do this without promises, this code would become really unwieldy and difficult to manage and write. So I think I'm done at least with this first part. What's coming next? So I need to show you how to use something called promises.all, I think. So if I want to create like a big array of promises, I can wait and have something happen when they're all complete. So that's something that's worth showing you. Another thing is, let me make a list of this stuff. So can I come over here? So I need to show promises.all. I need to show how to make your own promises. How to make your own promises. I'm going to just title the video, How to Make Your Promises, and maybe people who aren't interested in code would just want to know about how to make your own promises. How to make your own promises, how to promisify something, and then, guess what? Oh, I'm so excited about this. Then we're going to look at, I can actually really simplify how this code looks in a really nice way. I mean, you could actually skip all of that entirely if I use, and this is a part of like ES6 I don't know, it's a more recent version of JavaScript called async. the async and the await keywords. So I'm going to show how those work, and that's going to even simplify what we did here further. Now, I might be forgetting something that's important in this list, and when I come back in the next video, I will add to that list as well. Okay, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something about promises. It wasn't too long, and this was helpful to you.